Hi, this is Heidi Cooper of Torah Family Living. Today, instead of doing a live, because we've been having some technical issues every week, last week it actually cut off after 6 minutes, I decided to go ahead and get this pre-recorded so that I know it will all get to you intact without losing important content. And I am going to take some time to fill in the blanks with what was missed, which was cut off last week, because it was over 20 minutes long and more than half of it something happened technologically that it didn't make it. So today we're going to be looking at chapter 8 of the book The Renewed Covenant by Greg Witter. It kind of flows from chapter 7. A lot of the same stuff is done in more detail, so I'll be able to kind of combine the two and talk about the concepts together. I had some struggles wrapping my brain around this chapter, so I had some conversations with Greg to help kind of clear it up in my mind so I can explain it better, because there are some tricky concepts as we look at this idea of it being a renewed covenant and not an old and a new, and the old one being done away with. And a lot of it, I think, a lot of the confusion, I think, comes from ideas that we learned in the church and trying to sort out what Scripture actually says, and when we're thinking of ideas, is it actually in Scripture or is it just something we remember being taught? So there's a lot of unlearning, relearning, sorting things out. So Greg was kind enough to send me a whole lot of Scripture that, again, I think as we go through these studies, we find things that we didn't even know were in the Bible because we never studied it. We were never taught it. So yeah, I found that very helpful, and we'll cover those. But first, I did want to take a couple minutes to kind of finish the thought I started last week and got cut off. And that was, we were talking about when we find Scripture that seems to conflict and how to approach that. So I'm going to go ahead and this was Hebrews chapter 8 that I was finding issues that seemed to be conflicting. So I want to finish that thought first. So I'm going to read in Hebrews chapter 8. And as you may have noticed, if you had a chance to go through chapter 8 of the book, there is a lot in Hebrews that's explaining this concept of the renewed covenant. So I want to go ahead and read Hebrews chapter 8, starting in verse, give me a second here, starting in verse 8. Those numbers keep getting smaller. And I'll show you where I was having some trouble. Actually, I'm going to back up a little. I'm going to back up to verse 7. Verse 7, sorry about that. Okay, for if that first covenant had been faultless, there would have been no occasion to look for a second. For he finds fault with them when he says, "Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will establish a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. For they did not continue in my covenant, and so I showed no concern for them, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my laws into their minds and write them on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall not teach each one his neighbor and each one his brother, saying, Know the Lord. For they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will be merciful toward their iniquities, and I will remember their sins no more." In speaking of a new covenant, he makes the first one obsolete, and what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. Now, if you were listening carefully there, particularly that last verse, there's a huge problem there. It is actually saying that there's a new covenant and the old one is done away with. Now, we have been 7-8 weeks into this study, working through this book, we have seen a whole lot of Scripture that is clearly saying it's a renewed covenant, like the renewing of the moon is one of the pictures we looked at. And we know that our Elohim is unchanging. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. This idea that he threw out the old and brought in new is completely unfounded looking at other Scripture. So when we encounter something like this, we have to remember if our way of looking at the verse conflicts with other Scripture, particularly patterns that span Scripture, there's something wrong with our view of that verse. not Scripture. So we need to figure out where our error lies, because the error is not in Scripture, is what I'm trying to say. So I looked first at definitions of words, and I wanted to recommend. I'm trying to remember what was cut off last week and make sure I'm explaining everything. I use eSword, and I will put a link so that it is free to download. You can add all kinds of commentary, Bible translations, resources like Treasury of Scripture Knowledge, Brown Driver Briggs, all kinds of stuff. There are some things that you'd add I think you may have to pay for, but you can get an awful lot of resources and the software itself for free. So that, I believe it's eSword.net, and I will link to that in the description for you. That's a very, very good Bible study tool that's very accessible. So I went in there and I looked up definitions, and of course I forgot to set them here in front of me. But I looked up, for example, the word new, which also, as we've been looking at previous verses, it has the idea of freshness. So that goes along with our concept of renewal. So that made sense. The word for was it there? The old, growing old. That it was basically old. And again, the word vanishing away. So the definitions weren't really helping me. I had to look a little further. I had to get outside help. Ask for some help. So Greg actually just finished in the last couple weeks a book on Hebrews. So I flipped to chapter 8 to see if there was some more clarification on what is going on with verse 7 talks about a first covenant, and then verse 13 talks about a new covenant and making the first one obsolete. And what is going on here, which is another thing that you will need to check for if you're having trouble with a verse not making sense like this, is that the translators actually added words that aren't in the original language. That's a huge problem. So the word covenant in both verses 7 and 13 is not in the original language. It's not there. And I was able to confirm this in eSword. When you see a word that was added later, it's going to be in italics. And sure enough, right there, plain as day, the word covenant is in italics. It's pretty clear to see. Sometimes you can actually see this in a printed Bible, or you may need to use a Bible study software, but it's very easy to check. If it's in italics, it was not in the original, it was added later. So that is completely changing the meaning of the verse. It's not even talking about the covenant. It's talking about the idea of the priesthood being limited by time and space, whereas Yeshua's priesthood is eternal, timeless, and spiritual. That's all it's talking about. It's this idea that we've been talking about all along. So be very careful when you come across a verse that's really seeming to conflict what you've been studying throughout Scripture. There could be where we're not understanding the definitions correctly, so that is obviously something to check. And the second thing is, are there translation problems that conflict with the original language? So even if you can't read Greek or Hebrew, you can quite easily check, were there words added? Were there manuscript differences? These are things that we have the tools to be able to check. So again, if it was not in the original, you're going to see it in italics, so you can spot it pretty easily. So that was the case with these verses, was that the word covenant was not there in the original, therefore it wasn't talking about the covenant. Okay, so that was covered some in chapter, it was kind of introduced in chapter 7, explained better in chapter 8, so hopefully that helps you kind of wrap your brain around that better. So let me go ahead and get my book open to chapter 8 here. Okay. All right. So I've explained that. All right. So again, in verse 7, the priesthood was inadequate to achieve eternal redemption, which of course Yeshua's sacrifice was able to cover all people for all time. It didn't have to be redone year after year. So there was a limitation there that Yeshua's sacrifice took care of. Okay, and apparently this originally showed up in the King James version, and I was reading in the ESV, and they went with it as well. So I'm sure many of the popular English translations carried that on. And unfortunately, it's hard to think that it wasn't intentional, because this has forwarded the idea of replacement theology, where the church replaced Israel. And we know by even looking at Yah's nature, he doesn't do plan B. He had a plan before he even created the world to redeem mankind. So he's not rethinking and shifting and going, oh no, what do? I didn't expect them to do that. That's not how he works. So any view that portrays him as such, obviously there's a fault with that view. Okay, so I also wanted to go back and point out that Yeshua is the priest and king of the order of Melchizedek, and some of the key things being that was in place before the Aaronic priesthood, so it predates it. It applied to not just Israel, but to all of mankind, meaning that we can join Israel, we can be grafted in because it applies beyond that cultural barrier. And it also has Yeshua as both king and priest, which I think he plays a dual role, whereas when men were filling those roles, there was the king and there was the priest. They were separate roles. Yeshua fulfills both roles. Okay, and there was another thing that I wanted to... Okay, so as I was going through this chapter, a big question in my mind was, so we currently don't have... I don't want to hit the wrong button. There we go. We currently do not have the ability to offer sacrifices at the temple, because the temple, of course, was destroyed, and we're very clearly instructed, you bring your sacrifices to the place that I designate. Well, that place does not currently exist, but is all of that done away with? So I was talking back and forth with Greg, trying to just kind of sort this out, find the verses, figure out how this works, because I said, it seems to me that in the millennial reign, there will be sacrifices again. So how does all of this work? So he gave me a whole bunch of notes. And again, a whole bunch of passages that I went, oh, I didn't know that was there. So I am going to let you study this further on your own, but I wanted to make sure you have the passages that explain that, yes, we will indeed have sacrifices in the millennial reign, because we are dealing with a renewed covenant. Torah is not done away with. All of that is still in effect, but the key here is when the Levitical priests offered sacrifices specifically for sin, it was able to teach the people the cost of sin, but it could not actually redeem them eternally. It could not permanently fix the problem of sin like Yeshua's sacrifice did. So, but they had that picture, and in my opinion, it's a very valuable picture, because if you actually had to, a lot of you, I think, are homesteaders or may know someone who has animals, if you had to actually go out to your barn and pick your best animal and take it and kill it because you made a bad choice and sinned, I think we would all, because of that very visual, very personal cost, we'd be a whole lot more careful with how we live our lives. And that picture is important, because it's very personal. You had to actually go pick out your best animal and take it and have it killed, and you didn't even get to eat it. So that is a very important picture. So even in the millennial reign, there's going to be a lot of people that are still learning, and those pictures are going to be valuable to them. So I wanted to give you some passages that will help you to study this further, to understand that there will be sacrifices going on in the millennial reign. But the key to remember here is that all of the sacrifices, they have different purposes. Some were for sin, but there were a whole lot that, like there was the morning and the evening offering. There were praise offerings. There were vow offerings. There were the offerings during the feast. A whole lot of them were just praise, thanksgiving, making vows that had nothing to do with sin. So, of course, all of those will be in place. And then we'll have those visual teaching tools, which we see throughout Scripture. Even our tzitzis that we wear are a visual teaching tool. Okay, so first, Ezekiel chapters 40 through 48. They talk about a detailed prophecy of a future temple. It's not built yet. It's not the second temple. The measurements, the priestly divisions, the land allotments, the offerings are far too specific to be figurative. Okay, so, and it goes through, if you go through those chapters, it's talking about burnt offerings, sin offerings, peace offerings, Passover, unleavened bread, Sukkot, Sabbath and new moon offerings. So all of these will be when Yeshua is reigning. And in fact, I think many of you are familiar with it, that if a country does not come up to celebrate Sukkot, they will have a drought for a year. They won't get any rain. So these are definitely going to be pictures, physical pictures for us to understand that will be restored when Yeshua comes back. Okay, and it says here, they serve a ceremonial and covenant role like the renewed feast, without replacing or competing with Messiah's once-for-all sacrifice. They teach the nations who come to worship the King of Kings about righteousness, holiness, and the gravity of rebellion. Yeshua will reign as high priest during the millennium after the order of Melchizedek. Another book that is referenced heavily in these notes he sent me is Zechariah. It talks quite a bit about this future time, so you'll want to look at that as well. I think that's about 14 chapters. Okay, so the nations will be required to keep the feasts and bring offerings. They will come, again, this I said before, they will come up to worship in Jerusalem every year for Sukkot. If they don't, they will not get any rain for the year. Okay, and again, these sacrifices do not negate his sacrifice on the cross. They exalt it. Yeshua's blood atones once and for all. The millennial sacrifices are not competing atonements. They are prophetic memorials, covenant expressions of obedience. So the Levitical priesthood gave us this shadow picture of what Yeshua was going to do. And when they are restored, they are serving a similar function. They are giving us this physical picture of what Yeshua did on the cross. And like I said, right now, I feel like we have a bit of a lack in really comprehending the gravity of our sin, for example, because we don't have that ability to make a personal sacrifice in atonement for something that we did wrong. So that will be restored in the millennial reign, that physical representation of the spiritual truth. So hopefully that kind of explains it better. And again, let me go through some of these chapters that you'll want to study to be able to comprehend this a little better, because this is not something that we were really taught in the church. And so and particularly I think the prophets, we may not spend as much time there as we should. I know I don't. Okay, so first of all, Ezekiel chapters 40 to 48 gives us a detailed explanation of what that future temple will be like, how it will work, what we will expect to see. Zechariah, I would actually look quite a bit into the whole book because it again talks about this future time. And then he also referenced Micah chapter 4, and Isaiah chapter 11. And the whole book of Hebrews is talking about this looking at the different angles of the Levitical priesthood and the Melchizedek priesthood, and how Yeshua's atonement, because he is outside time, he's outside space, he has no sin, it was able to atone for all of us without this repeated sacrificial system. And I also will link that the Hebrews chapter by chapter book study is also available now, so I will link to that as well. So I hope that helps make all of these concepts. They are deep concepts, and they can be hard to understand, and so it's good to grapple and kind of work it out and try to frame it so that we can comprehend Yah's plan, because we know it went throughout time, it went outside of time, and we're looking at it from just a little part of that time. But I encourage you to go through these passages and grapple with it, and do your best to comprehend, and also at the end of the day embrace that he is an unchanging God and a loving God who provided this way of redemption for us even before he created the world, which is just an incredible thought. So, okay, thank you so much. Next week, I will be speaking at the Torah Sisters Retreat down in Grass Lake. So if I am able to, I will pre-record chapter 9 to go live on YouTube Monday at 7 as usual. If it doesn't pop up, it's that I just wasn't able to get it done. But I will do my best to have chapter 9 posted next Monday for you to go through that. And I think we might just do it this way for the time being, because the lives, they were giving us a bit of hassle. So hopefully this will work well for you, and be sure to share it with your friends. Let them know these videos are available to help understand these concepts. The book, The Renewed Covenant, is available, and I feel it is best that you work through these books as a group if you possibly can, so that you can be sharing ideas, asking questions, studying it together. I think that that's the best way to study scripture. We see this idea of midrashing, of just working through it together in scripture, and so I think that is the best way to go about it. So again, I'll have all those links for you, and I will see you next time. Lord willing and the creek don't rise. So, all right, have a wonderful evening. Shalom.